The air sat heavy and humid as Warwick jogged the running path along the canal. It made it harder to breathe. Every time he went out for a run in the summer, he questioned why the fuck he decided to live in a broiling oven of a state. He was the one to blame, really. It's not nature's fault the middle of the desert stayed steady at 100 and fuck you degrees. Lately, the city seemed so bleak and empty, with dirt and dust as far as the eye could see. Cactus seemed to be the only survivor. Warwick soon found himself in a bleak area of town, passing long-dead pickup trucks in front yards and rusted chain-link fences. The valley just had a bitch of a monsoon season. The high, rushing, roaring water in the canal fought for dominance against the music in his earbuds. Mange-ridden, collarless dogs played around him in the distance. He wished he could snatch each of them and take them home. Places like these were prime spots for people to dump their pets. Warwick knew others sometimes considered him arrogant and self-involved, but he had the softest heart for any four-legged furry beast. Sweat soaked his shirt, and a bead ran past his brow, stinging his eye. He let his thoughts roll on, trying to find anything to distract him from the roaring stitch in his side. His little adventure into the mountains a few days ago had led him to score 1/10 of a gram of gold. 17. Better yet, when he got back to work, he discovered he no longer had to see his nemesis, James, at the casino. James was a horrid person and an even more horrid player. No words came out of his mouth that weren't part of an insult. He couldn't handle his liquor. Even worse, he tipped like shit, if he even tipped at all. The gossip around the casino was that James owed a local loan shark hundreds of thousands of dollars, and since James couldn't pay, he paid with his life. Warwick couldn't stop his smile when he heard, as awful as others might find that. But he always believed that if you want to be remembered as a good person in death, you gotta be a good person in life. Then a sudden movement pulled Warwick out of his thoughts. About 40 feet away, a van pulled up and parked on a small bridge over the canal. A man got out, walked around to the passenger's side, opened the door, and grabbed a dog that sat on the seat. The animal writhed in his arms. A cold, sick feeling rose in Warwick's stomach as the man lifted the dog over the bridge's railing and dropped it. "Hey!" Rage filled him as he shouted at the man. As fast as he got out of the vehicle, he hopped back in and sped off, tires squealing and kicking up gravel as they spun. Warwick's heart pounded as the dog struggled to keep its head above water. The speed of the current made its paddling paws useless. The water raced the dog toward him. The cold feeling in his stomach turned to nausea as panic set in. He motioned to jump in, but hesitated. He had just used his powers the day before on the dowsing rod. His sight still blurred in and out, the effects of the roulette wheel still lingering. What could happen to him if he used it again so soon? But then the water brought the dog right across from him. He and the dog locked eyes. Those piercing blue eyes screamed desperation, ripping his heart in two. He thought, fuck it. Warwick closed his eyes for a moment. His magic energy swirled inside him and rushed to the sailor tattoos on his feet. They warmed under his skin, and Warwick knew what he had to do. He kicked the shoes off his feet and jumped. The stabbing cold water sent a shock through him, enough to make him forget for a moment where he was. He gathered himself and kicked his feet. The tattoos had already kicked in as he glided right through the current. He gasped for breath as he reached the surface. He looked around, finally turning to see the dog. Its head dipped underwater momentarily, then popped back up just past its eyes. Desperation coursed through him as he swam toward it. The water jerked him back and forth, side to side. Each time the current pulled the dog under, less and less of its snout came back up. Warwick's hands were inches from touching it. Then the dog went under. This time, no snout came back up. Warwick sucked in a huge breath and dove. He couldn't see under the brown, murky water, but he hoped his guess as to where the animal had gone down was right. After a moment, his outstretched arms came into contact with a mound of wet fur. Warwick grabbed it and kicked his feet with fury toward the surface. They broke through. He desperately tried to keep the dog's nose above water as he fought the current. He scanned for anything to climb to help them over the steep canal walls. Then, not far ahead, he saw a concrete drainage pipe jutting out from the wall. Warwick swam toward it and braced himself. His left side slammed into the pipe. He struggled to breathe, pressed between the water and the pipe. Warwick let out a groan as he gathered the strength to toss the dog over the wall. It landed just high enough for its scrambling paws to pull itself up. Panting, Warwick hoisted himself on top of the pipe and used it as a stepping stool to get as high up the concrete wall as possible. He clawed his way up, the concrete scraping and blooding his hands and feet. He made it over the top, his soaked clothes resting heavily on his skin. He lay on the ground, his breath slowing. The dog lowered its head to his, those piercing blue eyes peering into him once more. They were the last thing Warwick saw as his consciousness faded into darkness. The rustling of dirt and leaves rattled in his ears as sight returned. He found himself on his back, looking up at a sky that seemed glossy and gray. Masses of what looked like clouds hung above him, their edges smeared into the looming gray sky. He sat up and looked at his hands. They were smaller now, speckled with small cuts and scrapes. Dirt sat under his fingernails from some recent careless adventure. He looked at his legs, small and skinny, knees scraped and bruised. He saw his small form and somehow, without a mirror, knew he was back to the age of 10. He was in a clearing in the woods, trees with dead leaves filling in around him. A small voice called out. He looked to his right and saw his little brother waving. His mother and stepfather stood just behind his brother, tending to a campfire. His brother's face held a bright smile as he ran toward Warwick. Though his parents' faces were there, he couldn't quite make them out, blurred, like he was looking at them from far away. As his brother neared, another noise rose beside Warwick. He turned his head. Something in the distance crouched among the trees. Warwick stared, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. It moved, and a cold feeling overcame him. The crunching of leaves beneath his brother's feet stopped. Warwick turned to him. The words, "Did you see that?" tried to fall from his lips, but he couldn't move them the way he needed to. And when he finally faced his brother, his chilled blood turned to ice. His brother stared with unmoving, glossy eyes, staring into nothing. A strange symbol sat etched into his face, bleeding. His jaw slowly dropped open as the empty pit in his throat released a quiet scream that grew louder in Warwick's ears. Warwick gasped and jerked awake, his face assaulted by the licks of a sopping wet Australian shepherd, whining with concern. Coming to, he pushed himself up, rubbing the dog's head to try to calm her. Warwick checked his pockets, thankful the zippers had saved his wallet, keys, and phone. He did a quick test of his senses and realized he couldn't smell. He breathed a sigh of relief, grateful his powers hadn't taken his sight again. His energy hung by a thread as exhaustion overtook him. He wasn't sure if it was because of the rescue or from spinning the roulette wheel twice in such a short time. Maybe it was both. He trudged home, tired, wet, and uncomfortable. His thoughts faded to nothing, letting instinct and muscle memory take him the rest of the way. The dog walked right beside him, looking up from time to time like she was checking on him. Warwick locked his front door, dying to faceplant on his bed. But the sticky feel of the canal still clung to him. The dog brushed past and made herself at home, sniffing every nook and cranny of the kitchen and living room. Warwick ushered her into the master bathroom and into the shower with him. Afterward, Warwick changed, giving himself his well-deserved faceplant onto his bed. A twinge of irritation overcame him as his phone rang. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something told him to check it. When he picked it up, the name on the screen said, Aunt Dear. Warwick let out a slow breath as he closed his eyes. He felt guilty about dreading their conversation. It almost seemed like Damara had a sixth sense for knowing when he did something he wasn't supposed to. She had been a nurse who tended to him for months in the hospital after a bear attacked and killed his family. Since his grandma had long passed, she was the only family he had left. "Hey, Aunt D," Warwick said as he answered. "Hi, sweetheart," Damara said on the other line. Warwick allowed for a pause between them. She cleared her throat and continued. "It's been a while," she said, with concern. "Just wanted to check up on you." "You don't have to do that," Warwick answered. "You know I have to," she said. "You need to," Warwick thought, "because I might fuck up." "How's everything been?" she asked. Thoughts sprang into Warwick's mind of all the things he could say. Telling her how he really felt lately would only worry her more. Warwick looked over to the edge of the bed. Two light blue eyes peered over the edge, staring at him. Warwick smiled as he said, "I got a dog today." "Oh," Damara answered. "Saved her from the canal," he continued, reaching over and patting her on the head. "She almost drowned." A moment of quiet fell between them. "How did you do it?" she asked. Swam, Warwick said matter-of-factly. The quiet rose again, and Warwick knew he wasn't going to get away with such a lack of detail. Damara knew he'd refused to go swimming after he nearly died at the party. I made sure I wouldn't drown, he added. Warwick? Damara's voice teetered on the edge of scolding. I know, he answered. She'd shit herself if she knew how often he used his powers at work to get a good payout. It wasn't a lot, but it gave him a hefty paycheck every few months. You can't, she began. I know, he said, irritation piping into his loudening voice. But I couldn't let her drown. You're okay, though. Can you see all right? Yeah, I just can't smell anything. No one else knows still, right? Yes, Warwick's voice rose again. Okay, nobody knows. Same as always. Warwick's powers came with an often lonely life. Whenever someone asked about the necklace or the scar on his back, all those feelings and memories resurfaced. He usually kept his shirt on and his necklace hidden. Dating was practically impossible. Sex with a shirt on isn't exactly sexy, and the closer someone got to him, the more likely they were to uncover his secret. Warwick couldn't let them know. He'd seen enough superhero movies to know that gifts can get you locked up and used. Another quiet moment passed between them before Damara said, I'm sorry. I feel like all I end up doing is hounding you when I call. Warwick gave a small smile, letting his anger dissipate. You do, he said, but I know it's just because you care about me. Always, she said, her voice soft and comforting. Sleep pulled heavy on Warwick's eyes, providing just what he needed to end their conversation. Hey, Dee, he said, I'm exhausted. Can I call you back tomorrow? Sure, baby, she answered, worry still hung in her words. Get some rest. Take care of yourself. Love you, sweetheart. Love you too, Warwick replied. The line barely cut off before he let the phone drop beside him, and he quickly fell asleep. The next morning, Warwick awoke to the sound of relentless squeaking. He fluttered his eyes open to see the dog chewing on a lamb chop plushie, something Warwick had won in a claw machine ages ago. Where she dug it out from, he had no idea, but at least it kept her busy. Warwick reached for the remote and turned on the TV, needing something else to drown out the squeaking. Now and then, her eyes would dart up to the television for a few moments, and then she'd give her attention back to destroying her toy. The History Channel always seemed to hold her attention somehow. After a few minutes, Warwick went over to her, joining her on the floor as he teased her, taking the toy away. She barked and playfully nipped at his hands, and Warwick laughed. He wanted more than anything to shirk his responsibilities and spend the day with her. But alas, bills had to be paid, and the casino contained a surplus of irresponsible gamblers. Shower time, Furfus. Behave yourself, he told her, before he caught a glimpse of the TV before walking toward his bedroom. The narrator spoke of accounts of animal and human shapeshifters, tracks on the same path, switching from one species to another. Warwick turned on the shower and placed his necklace on the bathroom sink. It desperately needed a deep clean. He stepped into the hot water, which raced over him, and he closed his eyes. The shower was Warwick's favorite part of the day. The warm water always brought in warm thoughts and gave his mind a break from the never-ending list of things to worry about. Warwick thought of the television program in the other room. It dredged up childhood memories. Animorphs, the changelings of the Gamma Quadrant in Deep Space Nine, Mystique and her brotherhood of mutants. Warwick marveled at the freedom of taking on a new identity at any moment and leaving everything and everyone behind. But at least he had the dog now. At least no more than one person would miss him if he disappeared. The thought of the dog made him realize how long he'd spent in there. He finished washing and made his way out of the shower. He dug in the cabinet below the sink for his jewelry cleaning kit. He washed away the traces of the canal, then spent a few moments polishing it. He went to the kitchen, deciding to treat himself to his favorite dish, chorizo and eggs. He grabbed his trusted cast iron skillet. It had been passed down from his great-great-grandmother. He'd gotten it from his mom. It was one of the few things he had left of hers. Each time he cooked in it, he allowed himself the small, silly notion that maybe she was there with him, watching over his meal to ensure it never burned or got him sick. He scraped the food onto a plate and sat at the kitchen island with his favorite bottle of hot sauce, ready to devour the masterpiece. Yet as Warwick began eating, he tasted nothing. A perplexed look came over his face as he wondered what the hell he could have done wrong. He dumped more hot sauce on the plate, hoping for flavor, but it did nothing more than water would have. "What the hell is going on here?" Warwick said to his chorizo plate. He held the back of his hand up to his forehead, trying to see if he was sick with a fever, yet he felt nothing. Warwick took a few more bites and decided to give the rest to the dog. Warwick ate what he could and figured the dog would like the rest. "Hey, Furface, do you want some shitty chorizo?" he called out. He didn't see her or anything move. He shrugged and began scraping the food into her bowl beside the kitchen island. Then next to the food bowl appeared a paw, a tan and white paw with black spots, larger than Warwick's hand. His gaze followed up the leg, covered in the same pattern, until he came face to face with a leopard. Warwick stared at the animal, unblinking. His heart pounded in his chest. The leopard stared back with icy blue eyes and let out what Warwick could only describe as a deep, guttural meow. He jumped back and hurried to the opposite wall, wielding his 100-year-old skillet like a club. The skillet's remaining contents spilled all over the floor. The giant cat, paying him no mind, walked over to the mess without fuss and ate it. Warwick watched from a distance as this unexpected guest licked his terrible breakfast off the floor. The animal didn't show any sign of aggression, just kept casually cleaning up like it had lived there for weeks. "What in the hell is happening?" Warwick said to himself, still trying to grasp how a jungle cat ended up in his home. Struck by the cat's appearance, he nearly forgot about the orphan dog he had rescued. He scanned the room looking for the dog, but saw no sign of the wayward puppy. He called out to the dog he had yet to name. "Furface, come here, Furface." He scanned the room again and looked down. The 130-pound murder machine cat sat at his feet, looking up at him attentively, wagging its massive tail. Warwick, dumbfounded, had no other solution to the enigma except to accept that either his dog got completely eaten by this cat or this big-ass kitty was his dog. He looked down at the expectant feline and said, "Furface, is that you?" The large cat, loving the attention, stood up on its hind legs and hugged Warwick. He absent-mindedly stroked the big cat and looked around again for the lost dog. His eyes caught the television, reporting on large, endangered cats in the Amazon. The photo they showed looked a hell of a lot like the big cat he was petting. "Okay, so my dog turned into an endangered leopard from the Amazon." He went to finger his always-worn necklace. It wasn't there. He'd taken it off before his shower. "Ooh, so listening to the news about skinwalkers turned you into one, and the reason it worked is because I wasn't wearing my mother's necklace. Okay, first thing to do is get dressed, put on my necklace, and get my butt to work. I'll just figure this out later." As Warwick left his apartment, he was very apprehensive. He put down puppy pads, water, and the dry dog food he'd bought. He had prepared to play host to a stray Australian shepherd, but now he had a giant kitty. And he just bought nice leather furniture too. He pictured what a bored, 100-pound cat could do to it. Anything but quiet. Anxiety rolled through him as he wondered what kind of disaster he'd come home to. He pulled into his garage and carefully opened the door to the kitchen, not wanting to startle whatever wild beast might be waiting. But as he looked around, everything seemed fine, just like he left it. He glanced over at the couch to see his new friend, sound asleep. Not in leopard form, but now as a sloth. She sprawled out on her back, tongue halfway out of her mouth as Warwick stroked her stomach. He noticed her twitching in her sleep and realized she was dreaming. Her fur was thick, brown, soft, and short. He wasn't familiar with sloths outside of TV. He smiled and said, "Come on, let's go to bed." He picked up the sleeping sloth and carried her to his room. He placed her on the usually unused side of his bed and crawled in. He set his phone alarm, turned on his side, spooned the sloth, and fell asleep. Warwick once again found himself on his back, listening to the rustling of dirt and leaves. This time the sky seemed darker. Fewer clouds hovered above, now nearly a blurry mess of gray. He sat up again and looked at his hands and legs. They were the same small size as his 10-year-old self, yet again. The leaves in the clearing seemed more focused than before. The small voice of his brother called out to him once more. He looked over to see the familiar scene, his brother waving at him. His mother and stepfather stood just behind his brother like before. But this time, his parents stared directly at him while moving around the campsite. Their heads stayed still, unnaturally still, for the way their bodies moved. Only faint outlines of features sat on their faces. They looked more like creatures than the people he loved. Distance among the trees, the same figure sat hunched at the tree line in dim light. Ice ran through his veins as the figure stood upright on two legs, its long arms hanging past its knees. Then, two glowing red balls appeared where its eyes should be. Warwick's stomach turned as he went to ask his brother. The words, "Did you see that?" tried, but failed, to leave his mouth. He turned toward his brother. Bile rose in his throat as his brother's eyes rolled back in his head. The veins bulged, thick and dark. The muscles under his bottom lids strained like they might snap. Blood welled at the corners of his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. A symbol began carving itself onto his forehead, sending another trail of blood down the bridge of his nose. His mouth dropped open farther than it should have, like someone had sliced the tendon in his jaw. The quiet scream in his throat grew loud again. Warwick's body trembled under the weight of that unrelenting sound. Warwick gasped as the dream startled him awake. Groggy and still gathering his bearings, he brushed fur from his face, but it wouldn't go away. He froze in terror, realizing his face was pressed against a wall of fur way too thick for a sloth, or even a dog. A loud snore erupted from the beast as Warwick scrambled out of bed, tripping over the covers. When he finally got to his feet, he realized his sweet pup was now a full-grown yak. As Warwick left the bed, the enormous animal rolled onto its back, hooves in the air, its head pressed against the footboard, while its back hooves draped over the headboard and tapped the window. The animal let out a low groan as it wiggled around in the bed. Heart pounding, Warwick quietly backed away, putting distance between them. The yak's eyes fluttered open. "It's okay, girl," Warwick said calmly, arms outstretched, trying to soothe her. "Just take it easy." But it didn't work. Panic struck through the yak. She kicked her legs wildly, trying to find footing. A loud crash echoed as one back hoof smashed through the window behind the headboard. He ran to her, pushing on her side, trying to avoid her hooves while attempting to roll her upright. But just as he nearly had her turned, the center of the bed frame snapped. The mattress gave out, sending the animal rolling and breaking the rest of the frame as she slammed into the bedroom wall. She mewed in fear. Warwick rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her massive neck. It's okay," he whispered, holding her tightly. She groaned as she started to relax in his arms. Her panicked breathing slowed, but hadn't quite returned to normal. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Warwick said, choking on the guilt. "You didn't ask for this. This is my fault." But just as she started to calm, another piece of the bed frame crashed to the ground, sending her into another panic. She scrambled to find her footing. Warwick let go, knowing she'd drag him if he didn't. Desperate and scared, she charged toward the bedroom door, but missed, slamming into the dresser instead and smashing it to pieces. Her guttural, fearful wail echoed through the room as she got back to her feet and finally burst out of the bedroom. Warwick watched as she ran into his living room. As the crashing sounds of carnage grew, he realized he had to let the animal outside as soon as possible, or he wouldn't have a home left. He popped up and ran into the living room toward the front door. As he opened the door to make an escape route for her, he glanced around his home and took in the destruction. The walls had several kicked-in holes. He looked at the animal and realized she had somehow impaled his large TV on one of her horns. He called to her to try to lead her out, but fur-face animal was still in a panic, couldn't hear him. She writhed and bucked her way to his kitchen, desperately trying to find an exit. A hoof went into his stove. Another put a massive dent in his dishwasher. Warwick finally managed to get her attention, and she saw the open portal. She bolted full force for the outside. Her heavy hooves put more dents in his hardwood floor. Warwick spun to watch her escape into the front yard, and with open space all around her, she slowed her run. Warwick was happy his pet was finally out of danger, but as he turned around, he panicked. She had destroyed nearly everything he owned. He had home insurance but would have to explain the damages if he used it. Warwick had a silver tongue and a nice smile, but he doubted that would be enough to get them to cover the damage. He wondered how many good tip days it would take to fix it. Warwick sighed and looked back at the massive yak rolling in the grass like a dog. After a few days of trial and error, and doing what he could to salvage his wrecked home, Warwick and his dog didn't take long to settle into living with one another. Most of the time, she stayed in her Australian Shepherd form, but occasionally she shuffled through her inventory of animals. A small, perfectly cuddly red panda was her favorite form for bedtime. However, no matter how small the form she slept in, she still managed to kick Warwick off the bed some nights. Much like Warwick, she joined him in his guilty pleasure of Taco Bell, one they indulged in all too often. He'd add a taco or two to her dinner, wondering if maybe they were the key to her loyalty. One night after work, after they had eaten, Warwick realized it was the only time she hadn't left the house since she'd destroyed it. An uneasy feeling overcame him. The animal was far from being able to control her powers just yet. At least in the house, no one else could see, and more importantly, no one else could get hurt. Warwick looked out the window to see it was finally fully dark outside. He brought his attention back to her. She lay on the floor not too far away, looking up at him with icy blue eyes. They made Warwick melt. He got up and grabbed the leash. It was after dark, so if any trouble happened, nobody would see it. She jumped to her feet at the sight of the leash. She ran over to him, her cropped tail and rear end shaking back and forth at a wild speed. She whined louder and louder, inconsolable at the realization a walk was happening at any moment. All right, Warwick said with a laugh. He bent down, trying to snap the end of her leash onto her collar. You have to hold still. Eventually, the two figured out their dance. Warwick grabbed a flashlight before heading off into the night. Since the dog came into his life, he'd found her to be a brilliant animal. In addition to her shape-shifting ability, she had a high level of comprehension. She recognized her new name within a few days, and her recall was excellent. Was that what she was, or did he make her that way? They made it a few blocks to a creek bed when Warwick realized feeding her Taco Bell wasn't the best idea. She at least had the wherewithal to do her business in the creek bed, so Warwick didn't have to pick it up, just bury it. They walked for a while, blanketed by the warm summer air. The dog's ears perked up, and Warwick peered further down the walking path. An old woman approached them with a large German Shepherd and a tiny Chihuahua on their leashes. Warwick waved ahead and asked if his dog could meet hers. She seemed a bit tepid at the question, but agreed. Warwick led Fur face toward the dogs, and they played the usual sniff game until the German Shepherd started to growl, a deep, resounding growl that scared everything around. The lady tried calming the big dog and pulled it away, but the German Shepherd paid her no mind. She took the hint and backed off, with Warwick guiding his dog back, the old woman helpless to stop. It lost her grip on the leashes. The Chihuahua, now also free, hightailed it away from the chaos. The woman panicked and chased after her little dog, leaving Warwick to manage the mess. Warwick went to pick Fur face up, but he let go of the leash in the commotion. She chose flight over fight and ran back the way they came. The German Shepherd chased and nipped at her. Warwick also ran after them, but soon the two dogs rounded a corner out of sight. He heard a yelp and doubled his efforts to save his poor pup. Then a different sound echoed down the creek bed, one that had no business in a suburban neighborhood. Warwick skidded in the sand, trying to stop his sprint. He paused and looked down the creek toward the sound. The German Shepherd came racing toward him in full retreat a moment later. It passed Warwick without pause and kept going down the creek bed. Warwick carefully approached the bend in the creek, terrified of what he would find. Most importantly, he worried the dog had hurt his poor Fur face. What he saw made him laugh and sigh with relief when he rounded the corner. A rhinoceros stood before him, its front legs bent, placing its nose to the ground, its massive rump sticking up into the air. Then it rolled onto its back in a puppy-like way. "What am I going to do with you?" Warwick said as he approached the prone animal and scratched its belly. "Who knew rhinos like belly rubs?" To Warwick's relief, it didn't take long for her to morph back into her regular Australian Shepherd self. The rest of their walk home was, thankfully, uneventful. The event played over again in his mind. That stomach-souring feeling of helplessness crawled through him again. He looked across the room at her, curled up on her dog bed, exhausted from their eventful day. Warwick's mind took him to the hazy memories of his family, the camping trip, the unrelenting darkness, and the weeks after that in the hospital. He remembered lying in that hospital bed, engulfed with the feeling of uselessness. He couldn't or perhaps didn't, do anything 33 to save his family. And the dog, this wondrous creature that he so desperately latched onto, was now one of the only things left he truly loved. He needed to do what he could to protect her. So Warwick got to work. He did what he did best: tinker. He entered his garage and sifted through the cabinets and drawers, ideas racing through his head faster than he could process. He grabbed a pen, paper, some tools, the pepper spray from his keys, a flashlight, and an old policeman's baton he found at a thrift shop. After a couple of hours of tinkering, he bolted some old brackets onto the baton, securing a flashlight on top and pepper spray to the side. He also secured a small bracket to attach a dog leash. Warwick held up his newest creation, and after some consideration, he thought it looked like a tiny pitchfork. He held the creation aloft and loudly declared, "I hereby dub you the Trident." Quiet filled the room of Reverend Jaakobah's office. He sat at his desk, reading through a century-old book. He scoured through it, jotting down notes in the margins and a notebook next to him. A quiet knock came from his office door. Jaakobah looked up to see Helena, one of his assistants, opening the door and peering out from behind it. "Reverend, do you have a moment?" she asked. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders. "For you?" he answered. "Anytime." Assistant wouldn't be the right word for Helena. She was more like Jaakobah's right-hand woman, his infiltrator, his viperess. She was smooth and sharp, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Helena approached him as he sat at his desk. She sat on the chair across from him and placed a piece of paper before him. The paper had a name and phone number written in atrocious handwriting that could only belong to his secretary, Miriam. Jaakobah looked down at Stephanie Ficklin, then back up at Helena with a scowl. "Her? Really?" he asked, annoyed. "I said the same when I saw the message too," Helena answered. "But this time, she has a first-hand account of someone using a dowsing rod that I think should really be investigated. Miriam screened her already, and then I followed up with her today." "Really?" he said, surprised but still not convinced. "You talked to her, and you're still convinced?" A small, rare hit of a smile pulled on Helena's lips. She placed her fingertips on the paper and pushed it closer to Jaakobah. She said, "If it turns out to be nothing, I'll write all your sermons for the next month." Jaakobah smiled. He grabbed the phone off his desk and placed it in the crook between his ear and shoulder. He picked up the paper and put his fingers on the numbers on his phone. "Now that's a bet I'll take any time," he answered with a sly grin. Helena nodded. She stood up and headed toward the office door, removing any trace of a smile before leaving. Jaakobah sighed before punching in Stephanie's phone number. The woman was a consistent donor, yet an insufferable moron. The amount of small talk that woman was capable of was almost as impressive as it was annoying. The line rang twice before the receiver clicked. No doubt she recognized the church's number. Hello," she said, voice shaky. "Hello, Stephanie," he responded. "It's Reverend Jaakobah. I heard you have quite a story for me." He usually went for a smoother approach, but he knew by her incessant calling that he didn't have to do much smooth talking. She was the reason for their new call screening practice. He also desperately wanted more information, but grew irritated that he couldn't get it quickly. Stephanie began with her usual high-pitched, excited babble, reiterating how much she loved him and what he did. Jaakobah pulled the phone away from his ear and ground his teeth in annoyance. He cut to the chase before she could go off on one of her endless tangents. "I would love to catch up, my dear Stephanie, but I'm pressed for time. I'm writing my sermon for the next gathering, and I'd love to share news about what you saw." "Of course. Well, it wasn't me who saw it. It was my husband," she answered. Jaakobah rubbed his temple in frustration. "So it's a second-hand account, not a first-hand one." He thought of all the free time he'd have next month not writing sermons. "Okay," he said, trying to push aside his irritation. "What did your husband see?" "He's a tow truck driver, and he picked up a man in the middle of the desert. He had been out there for over 24 hours in 110 degrees. He said he used a dowsing rod to find water." Jaakobah went quiet, thinking. "Thank you, my dear," he said in his husky voice. "Do you have any other information? What's this man's name? How would I go about contacting him?" "Oh," Stephanie answered, a twinge of panic in her voice. Wait, it's in here somewhere." A frantic rustling of paperwork followed. She looked for the work receipt from when Matt helped Warwick start his truck. She found it, but it said nothing more than broke down truck, tow or jump. The signature on the bottom read, WW. "I'm sorry, Reverend. Give me one moment," she said before, calling out, "Matthew!" Jaakobah flinched and pulled his ear away from the receiver. Then he put it back to hear Stephanie bickering with what he assumed was her husband. "I need to know about that young man you helped last week," she said. "What kid?" Jaakobah heard in the background. "The one with the dowsing rod." Her tired words dripped with disdain. "Oh yeah, that's right," he said. "The casino kid." Stephanie grew more irritated and knew Jaakobah must be too. "Why did you call him the casino kid?" she asked. "What's his name?" She hoped he could muster up enough brain cells to answer two questions at once. "Because he said he works in a casino. He's a janitor or a dealer or something," he answered. "I definitely remember his name though. Warwick. Who the hell would name their kid Warwick?" A chill slithered through Jaakobah at the sound of Warwick's name. The hair stood up on his arms as his mind dug deep for a memory he'd stashed away. Stephanie's voice pulled him out of his haze. "I'm so sorry, Reverend," she said. "That's all I can get out of him." Yes, thank you, Stephanie," he said, frantic to write down the small pieces of new information as though they could disappear. "Thank you, but I've got to go," he added as she tried to speak again, but he hung up on her. Jaakobah picked up the phone again and pressed the speed dial for his secretary. He barked orders at her the moment the receiver clicked. "Get me a list of every casino in Arizona," he said, "and make sure Barrett and Helena have access to the unlimited card." The next day, Barrett and Helena found themselves sitting at a baccarat table in one of the most soul-sucking, dingy casinos they had ever had the displeasure of visiting. Helena grew more irritable as she reached the end of her mental rope. If hell were real, then her personal hell would sentence her to live eternally at a casino. She hated the stale smell of cigarettes, the endless slot machine chimes, the drunk screaming players, the hollering cocktail waitresses. She yearned for the sweet silence of her apartment. She would stop at nothing to have it soon. For Barrett and Helena, this was the 6th local casino they had visited in 2 days. At each location, they had casually asked for a Warwick. Helena was determined to find some kind of lead soon. She discovered, as in most tip-based industries, that the higher the tips, the looser the lips. The dealer began handing them their cards. Tired of being an unwilling D-list actress, Helena jumped into their usual script. She looked at Barrett and said, "Remember that dealer from a couple weeks ago? I can't remember which casino we were at, but he literally tossed the cards to us. This dealer is sliding them all nice." Barrett, getting settled in, gave Helena a confused look as he lit his cigar. He wondered why she was being so irritable and, well, bitchy. They were getting paid to play table games with the church's money. For once, while at work, they got to have fun instead of killing someone, though that task also had its own kind of fun. Barrett took a long drag from his cigar and let the smoke slowly billow out from his mouth. He couldn't enjoy his nicotine buzz with Helena stewing next to him, though he should be, considering this dealer had helped him win 5 hands in a row. He picked up one of his $100 chips. "Here you go, darling," he said, tossing it to her. "That's for you." Plastering on a fake smile, Helena did the same. The dealer, overjoyed, thanked them and placed it in her tote box. She glowed with excitement and gratitude. The dealer slid out the next round of cards Barrett looked at Helena and asked, "What was the sloppy dealer's name? Walter?" His words were a lifeless, rehearsed comment. Barrett was almost certain they'd never find this Warwick, but a part of him didn't care. He'd ride out betting at the casino on the church's dime for as long as possible. The dealer paused, holding the last card, deciding whether their bets won or lost. "No, it was a unique type of name," Helena answered. "Warren or..." She paused, eyes flashing over the dealer, hoping for her to chime in with the answer she craved. The dealer tilted her head in thought. "Do you mean Warwick?" The words shot through them like a lightning bolt. Goosebumps pricked down Helena's arms as she finally saw the finish line. But she couldn't stop their charade. Not yet. "That's it!" exclaimed Helena. She put one last round of energy into her acting. Warwick, sloppy dealer, but a very nice guy. The dealer responded, "Ah, yeah. He used to work here but moved to another casino a couple of weeks ago, Crimson Diamond in the West Valley." They had their answer, and now Helena could finally escape her personal hell. "Oh shit, I just realized. We have to go." She got up from her seat and grabbed onto Barrett's sleeve. She racked her mind for anything to keep the dealer from questioning their abrupt exit. "Here, this is for you," she said, pushing all the chips toward the dealer. "You too," she continued, turning toward Barrett, her gaze piercing through him like serrated knives. When she had that look, Barrett knew better than to question her. He barely managed to push his chips toward the dealer before Helena dragged him off his seat. "Here you go, sweetheart," Barrett said with a wink. The dealer's jaw dropped. She looked down and then back up at them, tears welling in her eyes at the sight of hundreds of dollars in chips just for her. "Thank you so much," she called after them. But before she could say anything else, Helena and Barrett were out of earshot. They hurried out the door and to their car. Helena quickly brought out her phone and placed a call to Jaakobah. He answered after only one ring. "We know where he is," she said as soon as it clicked. "How fast? Can you get to the Crimson Diamond?" An hour later at the casino, Warwick's eyes glazed over as he again found himself at a baccarat table. His assignment for the day was in the high roller area. They designed the pit to be tucked away and discreet for high rollers, which made sense. What didn't make sense was opening this obscure high roller pit at 10 on a Tuesday morning. Warwick told his supervisor, anyone that could afford playing in this pit would be at work. After an hour, he entered his baccarat table mode and thought about his predicament with Furface. But a guest walking toward him snapped him out of his thoughts. He went from baccarat table mine to shit show in the blink of a leopard's eye. The guest approached him dressed in slacks, a button-up, and a nice jacket. He had the sleek look of a politician mixed with a touch of danger. He was a man that people listened to. Warwick guessed the player was in his 60s but had excellent posture as he sat at Warwick's table. Warwick had a big smile for this guest, hoping his cards would be agreeable so he could make some money. "Hello, sir," he greeted. "How is this nice day treating you so far?" "Oh, very well. Thank you for asking," the man answered. Rev sat down at the table. His eyes flashed to Warwick's name tag, and his lips pulled into a smile. "Warwick, that is an interesting name." Accustomed to this comment, Warwick responded with his favorite line, "Well, I'm an unusual guy." His words brought out a chuckle from the man. "I bet you are," he said, pulling out a roll of $100 bills. Warwick wasn't surprised by the bankroll, but what caught his eye was the ring on the guest's right middle finger. His blood ran cold. On the ring, an etching of an organized cluster of hooded figures sat in the front, crowded around at varying heights like a chorus on risers. Each side had two raised crosses. A horseshoe-shaped curl sat on top. The moment Warwick saw it, he lost his smile, and the pull toward it became nearly unbearable. It was the same type of pull he felt with his necklace. Could they be made by the same person? Warwick's back straightened and his hand clenched into a fist. He recognized the delicate horseshoe-like detail, the exact signature on his horsehead necklace. This meant Yuri Zilberstein made the ring, and Warwick could enchant it. "Where did you get that ring?" he said, all joy and friendliness. "Gone." Surprised by his tone change, the man looked Warwick in the eye and smiled. "Do you like it? It has been in my family for generations." Warwick's eyes narrowed even further. He wasn't sure, of course, but he suspected that was a lie. The man threw down a stack of cash. After a moment, Warwick grabbed the bills, his eyes still locked with the older man's. Warwick, still having a show to run and security cameras on him at all times, began counting. A large stack of $100 bills required manager approval before the player could proceed. After he counted, the supervisor approved his $10,000 buy-in. Warwick looked at the man with stern, unblinking eyes as he passed him his giant stack of chips. Warwick loaded the blackjack dealing mode with brand new shuffled cards. He waited for this suspicious, impressive man to place a bet. Instead of putting chips in the betting circle, the man studied Warwick. Warwick's stomach sank, suddenly feeling like a gazelle in a lion's den. Instead of placing a bet, The man reached into the breast pocket of his expensive jacket and produced a business card. He set it down on the green felt of the tabletop. He then shoved the stack of chips Warwick had painstakingly built toward him, making a vast, colorful mess as he stood up. He said, "That is for your time, and this," grabbing the business card and tossing it on top of the fortune he had just tipped Warwick, "is for you to call me." He leaned in close to Warwick, so close that Warwick caught the scent of his expensive cologne. "You want my ring so bad," he said, his lips pulling into a dangerous smile. "Then maybe you can have it." Without another word, the man walked away toward the casino doors. Warwick watched as the strange, unnerving man, who never played a hand, walked away. Questions raced in his mind. Who in the hell was he? Why was he wearing a Zilberstein ring? Warwick looked down at the business card. He picked it up and studied it. A wood-grain design sat printed on the front. A cross sat in the middle. Underneath it, in the same gold color, it read, "The Bridge to Deliverance Church." He flipped it over. In the corner sat a small snapshot of the same face that stood before him just moments ago. It listed an address and phone number. But the name Reverend David Jaakobah, he couldn't help but read it over and over as it riled an eerie chill inside him. His interaction with the Reverend rattled him for the rest of his shift, so much so that he found himself making small, stupid errors while dealing, having to call over the floor manager. At the same time, players bitched about his incompetence. Usually, a player leaving a $10,000 tip would have him sporting an ear-to-ear smile for a week. But the cold chill of Jaakobah's presence still lingered around him. An aching need to have that ring itched underneath his skin. Warwick couldn't handle the feeling anymore. He left work early, racing back to his truck. He felt desperate and foolish as he struggled to type the numbers on his phone screen, like an addict desperate for the next score. But too many questions burned inside him to leave them unattended. He knew they'd consume him until he got his answers. At the church, Jaakobah's cell phone rang in his pocket. He pulled it out, smiling to himself as he looked at the unsaved number on his screen. He knew it had to be Warwick calling. "Greetings, Warwick. I'm so glad you called," Jaakobah answered, taking a chance. He knew by the stumbling voice on the other end that he was correct in his assumption. Hello, sir," Warwick responded, a bit dry in the mouth. He thought it prudent to say as little as possible, as he had already noted that the strange man held all the cards. A quiet fell between them. Jaakobah respected and appreciated that Warwick wasn't a blathering idiot. The soft rumbling of an engine and the clicking of a turn signal on the other line indicated that Warwick was in his car. Jaakobah took this as a good sign. Warwick was intrigued enough not to wait until he got home for their conversation. He said, "Mr. Warwick, I approached you because I heard rumors that you might have a touch of the supernatural in you." Typically, Jaakobah would make small talk and smooth the edges of a new relationship. Fortunately for him, Warwick hated small talk. Warwick, taken aback, chuckled. Nervousness stirred beneath his skin. "Sir, I appreciate your straightforwardness, but whoever gave you that rumor was either a fool or after something from you. I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Entertainment." That said, he was just a card dealer. Jaakobah had suffered the likes of people like Warwick dozens of times and rarely came off for the worse. Warwick did think this man was chasing ghosts. Nobody knew of his strange powers, and nobody had witnessed him using them. But as he drove his truck home to his new shapeshifter pup, it dawned on him that his situation was changing. He had come within feet of a Zilberstein relic. If he could just obtain that ring, his life would improve significantly, without risking the temporary loss of his senses. Warwick's powers scared him. He didn't dare push them because he couldn't control them. However, he knew he could empower these particular relics because he had done it before. Without his necklace, his life would be an absolute nightmare. A black cat crossing his path, giving him bad luck, could lead to his death not long after. After a pause, Jaakobah said, "Do you want my ring?" He said it, plainly, which Warwick again appreciated. Warwick responded, "Yes." Jaakobah replied, Then meet me at my office on Wednesday at 11 a.m. I'm sorry I can't meet sooner. I leave tomorrow for a short business trip to California. Once again, he surprised Warwick. His days off were Wednesday and Thursday, so this meeting time was convenient. He decided to make a power move and change it. Warwick said, "That doesn't work for me. I can do Thursday at the same time." Rev knew the game and decided to play ball. He said, "Thursday at 11 a.m. it is? See you then." Warwick hung up, excited and scared. He was thrilled to get another artifact, but at what cost? Warwick pulled into his garage. He thought the 10 grand he had just made would come in handy for the carnage he would indeed walk into. He parked and opened the interior garage door, expecting the worst. At first glance, all seemed normal. Warwick grimaced as he glanced at the TV he'd left on, displaying a nature show. "Hey, Furface, I'm home. You hungry?" he said in a cheerful tone. Seeing his new leather furniture looking undamaged made him sigh in relief. All was quiet except for the TV program about extinct animals from 10,000 years ago. As he couldn't find the creature, he grew concerned and searched the house. In his room, he saw a small, fast-asleep animal on his bed. He couldn't tell what type of animal it was, but it was furry and curled up in a ball. As he approached, the animal woke up, and Warwick realized it was a red panda. It was cute and reacted to Warwick's presence like any pet waiting for its owner to come home. "Hey, buddy, how was your day?" he asked. The red panda stood on its back legs and shuffled over to him. Warwick opened his arms and hugged the beautiful creature. Warwick took the red panda for a walk and returned home to feed it dinner. The animal had remained a red panda the whole time. Warwick was grateful it was dark outside because he and the panda were an odd pairing. A couple of days ago, he'd bought dog food for the animal, but didn't know if it would take it. "Let's try it, buddy," he said, filling a bowl with dog food. The red panda sniffed at it and walked around it several times, but eventually tucked in and ate the offerings. "So you're an animal that can turn into different animals," he said to the distracted creature. "How am I going to get food for any animal you decide to be? It'd be like trying to feed a zoo." "How about I call you Zookwick?" The creature stopped eating and looked up at him, its small red tail wagging. Afterward, Warwick placed himself on the couch and swaddled Zookwick and himself with a blanket. He chose the scariest movie he could find and stroked Zookwick's soft red fur until she fell asleep. Warwick allowed this small moment of comfort and quiet to settle into him.